This video is sponsored by the Biscuit Barrel. The Biscuit Barrel are a comedy sketch group which I am a member of. Right now we are all out and about at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival performing. If you're anywhere near Scotland, then check out our show. Otherwise, you can see digital sketches linked in the description. Now, on with the video. So, what is the best 3D Sonic game? Sonic Adventure 2 has a great mirrored control scheme and an interesting story. Sonic Unleashed has that great boosted gameplay mechanic. Sonic Colors perfectly rounds up all of those Sonic traits, and Sonic Generations complements Sonic in both modern and classic forms. But honestly, I'm really surprised that Sonic Heroes doesn't get more attention in the fanbase of the Sonic world. Sure, it seems like a bit of a spin-off title with its most obvious design choice, but I think when looking at all the different styles of Sonic the Hedgehog we were gifted with over the last 19 years, the Sonic Heroes format is a damn good one that was surprisingly never given a sequel or second attempt. Especially when you consider that Sonic Heroes was a major commercial success, selling 3.41 million copies after 2007, and reviews were pretty positive of many of the gameplay elements that Sonic Heroes introduced. Fans were big fans of the game, and it allowed for the tasteful exploration of additional characters, likable or not. The biggest twist to the Sonic Heroes formula over all the other Sonic games is that through any given level you don't play as one, but three characters, simultaneously. One representing speed, one representing power, and one representing flight. And depending on who you are playing as, the trio will migrate into certain formations that allow you to use a variety of movesets. Obviously, the speed formation makes you move faster, allowing you to dash ahead, jump between walls, and cause cyclones over your enemies. The power formation has you punching enemies, smashing projectiles down onto them, or floating on any upwards draft. And finally, the flight ability allows you to shoot projectiles and obviously fly. And on top of simply giving the player more control options, these different formations also allowed for all sorts of different level design choices. For example, one of the biggest praises for the layouts of many Sonic Heroes levels is that they quite familiarly replicate the same style as the 2D Sonic games, hosting a variety of alternative routes to explore and find. For example, at any given junction, you'll be given 3 choices, each corresponding to a certain formation to find a different way across a certain section of the level. The level designers were also able to get creative with many of the character traits, such as introducing a go-karting segment that needs all 3 character types to function properly. Losing the flying ability, for example, takes away your ability to jump. It's simple, yet crazy creative. There's also certain enemies that are weak to certain formations, like flying enemies being stunned by flying formations and only then being vulnerable to the other approaches, or enemies with defenses that can only be taken away with a speedy cyclone or something of that nature. On top of having 3 characters to juggle in any given level, the game also expands its roster more by introducing 4 playable teams, each with an identical control scheme but slightly different presentation. Not only does this give great fan service for fans of the other Sonic characters, not you, but it also allows for more interesting storytelling as each team has their own objectives and goals, and will often cross over with the other characters on their way to wherever they're going. Depending on which team you're playing as will also affect the gameplay in certain ways. Obviously, as a start, the levels themselves will be different, even if they're coated in the same assets and visual design, but they also vary in difficulty depending on who you're playing as, with Team Sonic being normal difficulty, Team Rose being easy, and Team Dark being hard. There's also an element of in-level progression as each character can be leveled up, increasing the potency of their moveset, potentially creating the difference between stunning enemies in the air to completely destroying them. Together with a variety of level layouts, alternate routes, in-level progression, and variety of movesets and character fan service, Sonic Heroes successfully plays out with an entirely new and ambitious gameplay format that is simultaneously fast, fun, and replayable. A perfect little wrapped up gift of a Sonic game. Now this game came out in early 2004. I was about 7 years old, and I'd first discovered it on someone else's Xbox, and since it was the second ever Sonic game I'd ever played, I was pretty ecstatic about it. Soon after that brief introduction, I got the game myself, and I played it constantly. Not only was it my #1 game on the GameCube for a couple of weeks, but even when visiting other people, I actually used the portable feature of the GameCube and took the game to other people's places to play the game at theirs. In hindsight, I probably should have brought a second controller, as I always played single player even when visiting other people, but I was 7, and people generally seem to have put up with it, I guess. There's literally old video camera footage of me playing this game at a friend's house and the other children just watching in awe. If I wasn't in Edinburgh with Biscuit Barrel right now, I could probably show you the footage, but oh well, I haven't got it on me right now. As a kid, I swiped through this game, only ever stopping at 2 major points, that being at the end of Team Dark's Metropolis stage, where the escape from the rising lava consistently screwed me over on the harder difficulty, and the very end of the game with the final boss somehow just being impossible to beat. So with that in mind, let's move on to the less than great elements of Sonic Heroes and what exactly is wrong with it. Because while I may have some rose-tinted glasses on the whole game, many people have quite a few qualms with this game. The biggest and pretty hard to ignore one is the writing and the voice acting present in this game. While Shadow the Hedgehog was overly dark and serious, Sonic Heroes is very much bright, colourful, and cheesy. While I personally love the saturated colours that really feel reminiscent of the classic Sonic games, I definitely have to admit that the dialogue and plot is pretty... Well, I was gonna say shallow and cheesy, but I mean, whatever you say, Knuckles. Within the gameplay, it's pretty easy to manipulate the language of the characters as they say the same one line every time you pick them, which gets old very, very fast. Not to mention, even in the cutscenes, sometimes it seems like the voice line sounds so bad that it should literally be peaking the microphone. Froggy! In the story, Eggman is literally like, "In 3 days, I will reveal my secret weapon. Just try to stop me before then." Literally, try it. I'm giving you loads of opportunities here. Go for it. There's also specific levels that people have qualms with. For me, it's Metropolis, but for others, it's the Bingo Highway or the later Chaotix missions taking far too long. Or again, that final Fortress endgame level just being too much of a difficulty spike. The bosses also leave something to be desired at times, as every other boss fight is just a marathon of fighting ordinary robot enemies, which isn't all that investing. The gameplay is also slippery, at least in movement controls, and though I personally enjoyed the feeling of always being fast, I can understand the issues some people have with that. Plus, the repetitive controls of each team made many elements of the gameplay seem overly used and boring, as there was very little variety to play with. And finally, though kind of a mixed point, the levels are long, longer than an ordinary Sonic level, which means on one hand, those fast-paced levels go on with plenty of content to enjoy for a good 7 to 10 minutes, but on the other hand, perhaps it all overstays its welcome. So with all those points in mind, how can the format of Sonic Heroes be improved into a potential Sonic Heroes 2? Well, for a start, the biggest issue will likely be fixed with ease in modern times, as voice acting in Sonic games gets a much bigger boost in attention compared to 2003. So that will likely not be a problem anymore. As for the writing, I feel much of the positive energy can still stay, but perhaps overlaid with something a tad more serious as well. Something a bit more akin to modern Sonic games. Honestly, I think this part just comes naturally, these improvements. Though it would certainly be nice to see something more substantial for a storyline plot for each team and Eggman's plans. Something more closer to how Sonic Adventure 2 took on its plot approach. While simple works, having something a bit more deep and investing certainly wouldn't be a bad change. And speaking of change, tackling the repetitive issue is a bit more of a harder challenge to overcome. Having 4 teams of 3 allows for a lot of character fan service for the player, but having them all control identically forces the player to essentially beat the game 4 times before finishing it, which is problematic. But at the same time, changing too much of the movesets for each team can easily get overly complicated for a single game to encapsulate. So either the sequel will need to compromise with some smaller variations on what each team can do to spice up the level designs and gameplay functionalities between teams, or there would need to simply be an element of customization, allowing players to use different approaches between teams if they so wish to. And if that doesn't work out, then just trimming out the fat of the game and shortening it will make the repetitive nature seem more subtle. Making level design shorter, or even losing an entire team just to shorten the overall game and make it a little less repetitive. It's a harsh choice, but it's a difficult issue to overcome otherwise. Then there's the simple stuff like the bosses. Those robot marathons, they're not good boss fights. Chug them away. Keep one if you absolutely must, but otherwise just throw in some new boss types. If they all have to be Eggman machines, so be it, but gigantic organic bosses from specific levels or teams is a nice idea too. Movement controls can be tweaked as well, but keeping that slight slippery sense will still keep it grounded in the Sonic Heroes feel. It's case by case, I guess, on what people prefer. And when it comes to specific level designs, all that can really be done is learn from those mistakes. There'll likely be another casino level, but just don't make it a crazy long and tricky labyrinth. Make it easier to survive in. And if there's another Hunting Chaotix level, make it more player friendly and avoid the cheaper deaths from the finale of the game. If you simply just make little tweaks to the original Sonic Heroes game, you'll be in for a pretty golden new Sonic game to enjoy. Expand the multiplayer to beyond 2 players, maybe add in some online functionality, or leaderboards, and the game will last even longer than a normal single player game. And visually, it'll look pretty nice too. I personally really love the visual design of this game. The bright and colourful aesthetic of the characters and the actual model design of them is generally very visually pleasing. And it'd be quite fun to take Sonic back to a slightly more old school design, rather than the lanky average bore of the modernist Sonics. After that, all that's really left to change for the Sonic Heroes sequels is perhaps some character changes, be it who you play or how they control. Add in some original additions like perhaps new mini missions a la Sonic Generations, or just some new assets to interact with formations. Maybe even slide in some of the greatest elements from other Sonic games. Reference the boost mechanics in some spin-off minigame like chasing the Chaos Emeralds. Splash all sorts of reference in from other characters that aren't the main trio, as how often do you see those characters represented in the game? Or translate strange assets from future or classic games and reinvent them anew for this new format of Sonic. Whatever splashes of originality can be thought up, it has to be the same fun and fast gameplay as its predecessor, heaped with all sorts of improvements and exciting fan service, with an improved story that doesn't make players roll their eyes, but gives hours of entertainment. Do all of that and you'll be set for a uniquely semi-new Sonic game that could get fans back to being as excited as they were way back in the early noughties. But that's just one idea for where Sonic is going next. The big 30th anniversary is coming up in a couple of years, so who knows what Sonic's next big leap is going to be. I, for one, am eagerly watching to see what happens next.